Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited to continue our offseason previews here on the channel with the Detroit Pistons, who had such a phenomenal 2024-2025 NBA season for themselves with a huge turnaround. So if you're a Detroit Pistons fan, smash that like button and subscribe if you do enjoy the content here. I'm extremely happy for the Pistons and their overall turnaround of this franchise. And if you're a fan of another team, go ahead, comment down below which offseason preview you would like to see next. When it comes to the video preview, what are we going to discuss in today's video? The Pistons do not have a lottery pick this year, which should be music to the ears of Pistons fans. What they do have is a season recap. That's what we're going to start with. Take a look at where this team just was. Of course, lost in the first round, unfortunately, to the New York Knicks, but I thought had a very competitive series and a great regular season as well that I want to spend quite a bit of time talking about in today's video. We're then going to look at NBA draft prospects to consider at pick 37. They do have a second round pick, so I am going to cover some second round options for the Pistons here, guys that I do think could make some sense. We'll look at their NBA free agency situation as well. What's their cap situation look like? Do they have any potential avenues to operate with cap space? The answer to that is yes. We'll talk more about it later. We'll look at trade possibilities for this team as well. Is there any big names that the Pistons could look to go after a big season of improvement? Are they slated to try and take another step forward with a big acquisition? And then we'll look at an early outlook for next year. Of course, a lot can change between now and then, so it is a little premature, but very valuable still to kind of give my early indicators and my early thoughts on what this team could look like next season in terms of the win column and how good they really will be with their young core nucleus still in place. So let's get into that 2024-2025 season recap. First of all, a 30-win improvement for a team that won 44 games really marks the job that head coach JB Bickerstaff did in comparison to Monty Williams, who was an absolute disaster. And the best thing the Pistons did was swallow his contract and decide that firing him and changing course, changing direction was the best actual decision for the franchise. And I think Trajan Langdon, the new head honcho there in the Pistons front office, deserves a lot of credit for the offseason that he had last year, where he retrofitted this roster around Cade Cunningham, around Jalen, Duren, and their young core nucleus. That also includes Jaden, Ivey. And with the veterans that he brought in, they weren't huge names, they weren't big, drastic signings or additions, but they were very notable additives into this team and this roster that helped them win a lot of games this year. I thought the Pistons had a great trade deadline as well, getting Dennis Schroeder, making some moves on the margins to help them not only long-term with draft assets and flexibility, but they also brought in a player in Schroeder, part of a multi-team trade that helped them big time, part of that Jimmy Butler deal. So I do think that overall Trajan Langdon and the Pistons have done a great job in retrofitting this roster, changing some of the things around. And then you also have to give a lot of credit to JB Bickerstaff, the guy who did replace Monty Williams. And I think Bickerstaff did a great job kind of figuring out ways to weaponize Cade Cunningham and the spacing around Cade Cunningham more. I think Bickerstaff, someone who did at times struggle in Cleveland to maximize the overall talent there, had a pretty good coaching year for himself in his first season in Detroit, making that move over from Cleveland, Ohio, over to Detroit, Michigan. It worked out quite well for him. And it's a byproduct of what we saw in the team's offensive and defensive rating, where they ranked nearly in the top half for both this year. Their offense was slightly below average at 115.0 team offensive rating, which ranks 16th in the NBA, and then 113.1 team defensive rating, which ranked 11th. And I want to point back to last year, where everyone on Twitter all over the place was saying that Jalen Duren cannot defend, Jalen Duren's terrible big man, this, that, and the other thing. We actually got him a good head coach who had a smart defensive scheme. Jalen Duren's defensive flaws were much less obvious this year than they were a year ago under Monty Williams. And that is a testament to coaching and the value of scheme and defensive coverages and how you utilize your players to the best of their abilities. And I think Jalen Duren this year was a great testament to the work that JB Bickerstaff put into building a very good team defense this year. Cade Cunningham, of course, is the headliner. Remember a year ago, everyone was saying that the Pistons might look to trade him and that rival teams should be calling Detroit to see if Cade Cunningham is unhappy and wants to be moved. The whole time through that whole process, I said for Detroit, it would be a complete and utter mistake to trade Cade Cunningham. It would be ridiculous and ludicrous to even consider doing so. Thank God they didn't. Cade Cunningham is the franchise icon. He is the best player on this team by a wide margin. He is a true superstar ascending player and going to be the face of the Detroit Pistons for years and years and years to come. Now the question at some point will be, is the talent around him good enough to win a championship? There's going to be questions that do arise over the next 3-4 years, right? And that's something that every team goes through. While yes, you have your own young homegrown players, at some point teams do have to step on the accelerator. And that'll be a question for Detroit over the next couple of years. We'll talk about it even later in this video. But right now, Pistons fans, especially with where the Pistons have been recently in terms of how bad they've been, losing so many games each year, they should just be overwhelmed and happy with how great this team was. And I think that is the sense I'm getting from Pistons fans on Twitter and all over the place from my comments and everything. I just think Pistons fans are relieved and happy that Detroit is back into the playoffs, had a good year. Yes, they lost in the first round, but for the most part, it's sunshine and rainbows right now in Detroit, which I'm very glad to hear. Jalen Duren, I thought, had a really good season for himself. Averaged a double-double. I thought we saw some of that playmaking juice come to life this year, too, averaging over 2.5 assists per game. I know that number doesn't sound that gaudy or impressive, but for a big man, especially one as young as Jalen Duren, who is still very, very young, he's going to be younger than a lot of players drafted in the first round in the 2025 draft. Jalen Duren has still a lot of potential to grow into, a lot of room to grow and blossom as a player. I think this guy is going to be the second best player for the Pistons moving forward, probably. Isaiah Stewart, listen, there's a lot of hate for him as well. People who don't watch the Pistons regularly don't really understand or value how good of a player he is, specifically in the rim protection and paint defense components of the game. Now, when it comes to Detroit maximizing their offense, questions about Duren and Isaiah Stewart together, I think there is some validity to those concerns specifically in terms of the combination of playmaking and juice and athletic traits. But all in all, it is a strong front court to build around, especially defensively. And I think for the Pistons moving forward, Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart will be long-term core pieces for them at this point in time. Jaden Ivey, I just feel really, really bummed about his injury this year. I thought, the season he was having pre-injury, though obviously a devastating season ender for him. You guys know how I feel about Jaden Ivey. I think this kid's still got star potential. I think there's a lot in his game that he can still unlock, and I think he was just barely scratching the surface of some of that at the beginning of the year before that injury, where he was averaging almost 18 points per game. His efficiency was back up. Monty Williams was a huge negative for Jaden Ivey's productivity and developmental plan. I think really this year was a big get back on track for him before that injury. So again, I'm super devastated. I'm hoping Ivey can come back healthy, be the same player he was before the injury, and continue growing. That will be an uphill battle for him. But I do think as long as the Pistons still continue to believe in Jaden Ivey long term, there is still a huge ceiling for him to reach at some point in the future. Malik Beasley, what an addition. I could not believe that the Milwaukee Bucks had no interest in retaining him. One of the biggest decisions Doc Rivers made last year was benching Malik Beasley essentially for Patrick Beverley. One decision that made zero sense. The Bucks, before hiring Doc Rivers last year and when they still had Adrian Griffin, were relying on Malik Beasley as a floor spacer, shooter, and it contributed to the Bucks having one of the best offenses in the entire league in the first half of the season. Then they decided to fire Griffin. Malik Beasley ultimately lost his role. The Bucks lost in the first round last year. They lost in the first round again this year. Malik Beasley is a good basketball player and someone who brings a lot of value to a team's offense with his shooting, shot selection, the speed of his release. There's a lot of little nuances in his game in terms of scoring in transition, finding open space, moving off the basketball, relocating timely fashions. Like, Malik Beasley is a very undervalued player, and the Pistons, I thought, really did a great job bringing him in last offseason. I love that signing for them in the spacing. And then they also made some other acquisitions. We talked about the Dennis Schroeder trade. That helped them a lot, giving them another ball handler. One thing to point out at this team did turn over the ball quite a bit. Part of that is a testament to them being very young, and a lot of it also stems from Cade Cunningham being overtaxed with the ball in his hands too frequently. And I thought Dennis Schroeder brought a decent amount of ball handling to surround Cade Cunningham with, where Schroeder can still exist off the ball. Cade can be his on-ball best version of himself, but you do need other ball handlers. And the Jaden Ivey injury, I thought, really pointed to some of the concerns there about overtaxing Cade with ball handling responsibilities. And I think for Detroit moving forward, the more ball handling they can have, the better. The more decision making they can have, the better, just because it adds to connectivity and adds to an overall team offensive context that's a lot more difficult to guard when you have multiple guys capable of dribbling, passing, and shooting. And that's what the Pistons valued this offseason, right? Tobias Harris was a very good veteran addition, one that, honestly, I have to eat crow on. Last offseason, I thought they overpaid for him, but I think looking back on it, the short-term nature of the deal, just being a 2-year contract, I think I focused too much on the annual average value, which, to be honest with you, I still don't think Tobias Harris brought $25 million of value this individual season to Detroit, but I cannot deny that he was valuable to them, period, and helped them win more games than they definitely would have without him. He was a great veteran presence on the court. His shooting capabilities, off-ball play was very valuable, and he's also just, I think, a really well-rounded defensive player. I know people are going to say, well, he's not a great defensive player. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying he competes on that end of the floor, rebounds adequately for his position. There's a lot of little small value that he brings on that end of the floor that I don't think gets talked enough about, even though he isn't a great defensive player. And then Tim Hardaway Jr., of course, they got him in the Quentin Grimes trade. Although Quentin Grimes did find a nice role in Dallas, ultimately got reshipped out to Philadelphia. Quentin Grimes now on his 4th team in 3 years, which is crazy, but I think for Tim Hardaway Jr. specifically, the value he brought to Detroit was another floor spacer shooter, high volume catch and shoot guy. Now, I think Tim Hardaway Jr. is expendable long-term for Detroit, and part of that is they have 2 young wings in weight here. Ausar Thompson, who had a much bigger role this season, and obviously showcased a lot of talent and physical gifts on the floor for Detroit when he was on the court, and then Ron Holland as well, another guy who there's a lot to love, the go-get-after-it nature, a little bit of the bad boy Pistons being back with Isaiah Stewart, Ron Holland, who's not going to take nothing from nobody. Like, there's a lot to like there, but also these 2 guys are very interesting for me because I do think the best version of Detroit has a good amount of shooting and playmaking around Cade Cunningham, and while Ausar Thompson, I think, helps with the playmaking, and I think Ron Holland helps with the downhill force, transition play, defensive capabilities around Cade, it doesn't maximize the three-point volume. And listen, there's a lot of things in basketball that matter. It's not just three-pointers, but having good shooting, good team spacing is very valuable. And I think Ron Holland still has a lot of room to grow as a decision maker, a facilitator, a passer, a shooter, a scorer in the half court overall. I do have some concerns here. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to lie to you guys. But I do think all in all, Detroit's still in a very good position moving forward because of this collection of young talent. And obviously they have players who can go get after it. I do think the multiple efforts, the defensive flexibility, athletic tools are very important as well. So Detroit in a great spot. Cade Cunningham, of course, still the headliner. And then going around that, what guys could they look to add at pick number 37 this year? I have a litany of guys that I do think would make some sense in a variety of roles. Mark Sears out of Alabama, an older college prospect, someone who you look at, you're going to say, well, there's not really a high ceiling here. What role would he fill for Detroit? Very clearly, concisely, he's another ball handler, an off-the-bench scoring guard who can handle the rock, initiate offense for you. In the 12 to 15 minutes a game that Cade Cunningham is not on the court, Mark Sears can be someone who runs your offense, and there is significant value in that. He's going to be able to get to spots. He's a smart individual player who can get 2 feet in the paint, understands what the defense is giving him. He's going to be a successful NBA point guard against drop coverage. I think there is value here in Mark Sears that other people are not looking at enough, talking about enough. They're hyper-fixating on his lack of size. They're hyper-fixating on some of the other concerns. But ultimately for Detroit, you look at the team that just beat you, Jalen Brunson, look at the way the Knicks hide Jalen Brunson. Look at the way the Knicks protect Jalen Brunson. I think Mark Sears, he's not going to be Jalen Brunson. I do not believe that at all. There is a significant quality difference between Sears and Brunson. But I think from the overall play style perspective and the way that Sears can be beneficial, there's ways to protect him as well. And Detroit already has some of those pieces in place in Ausar Thompson, in Ron Holland, in some of their overall perimeter defensive capabilities that they have already on the roster. Maxime Reynaud is an interesting stretch big man option for them as kind of this 4-5 hybrid. I haven't talked as much about him on the channel this year as I probably should have up to this point because there is a lot of physical tools here. He is an older prospect as well, a 4-year senior out of Stanford. But he is somebody who can stretch the floor. That was really one area where he expanded his game this year. From his junior season to his senior season, he added 4 extra three-point shot attempts per game. While it did hurt his overall field goal percentage, it did increase his overall flexibility offensively and versatility that he can provide to an offense. And I think for Detroit, if you're looking to kind of round out your front court a little bit more long-term, Reid is a very intriguing option for them. Alex Tui, a catch-and-shoot wing coming out of the NBL for the Sydney Kings. I do think Tui is another player who, if you're looking at replacing Tim Hardaway Jr. long-term, Tui could be an interesting floor spacing option. I don't really think there's a lot of upside here. I kind of have him as a depth piece type player in this year's draft, where he's going to be a 9th, 10th, 11th guy on a roster probably, but there is some value there. If you are looking for shooting, there's a couple of different guards in this class that can kind of tickle your fancy there a little bit. Tyrese Proctor out of Duke, someone who completely changed his role from his first 2 college seasons for the Blue Devils to where he was last year playing next to Cooper Flagg. And with that came a lot more productivity and success. Tyrese Proctor proved to be a better off-ball guard than an on-ball guard, and that's something I was a little hesitant in believing until this year. He showed it, very consistent throughout the course of the year, and I think that's a testament to his shooting talent that he has, but also the ability to handle the ball just a little bit, bring the ball up the court, initiate some actions, and this is where you can find someone who, with really respectable positional size as well for Proctor, he could be a very fun fit next to Cade Cunningham, where at times Proctor can bring the ball up the court, handle the ball a little bit, but when you do want Cade to have the rock, when you have Cade making the decisions, running the pick and roll, initiating all of your offensive action, Proctor can still be an additive player off the rock as a shooter, someone who's spacing the court for you and knocking down open jump shots at a reliable rate. Talking about open jump shots and knocking them down consistently, Koby Brea is an absolute flamethrower. This is the best shooter in the draft probably. Now I know guys like Trey Johnson will definitely garner higher attention because of his wider range of skills earlier in the draft. Koby Brea is somebody who can just flat out shoot. He was dominant in his early years with Dayton, playing off of guys like Daron Holmes II, where he was an elite off the handoff shooter. And then at Kentucky, kind of expanded even further into more off-ball action, playing off the catch a little bit more, and he is just someone who exhibits elite NBA range. He can shoot the ball at a super high clip. I'm telling you right now, Koby Brea is going to be underdrafted. He's going to be drafted lower than he should because he's an older prospect who's fairly one-dimensional. The one thing, and I think the Pistons this year proved it with guys like Malik Beasley, that one dimension being shooting is extremely valuable, and it adds so much off-ball functionality, especially for someone like Brea who has the range and the experience as an off-ball player. This is the top of the totem pole for me, in my opinion, for the Pistons at 37. If Koby Brea is available, he should be the pick for them. I would absolutely love that selection. Looking at a few other ball handlers, Boogie Flan, someone who's very capable with the ball in his hands. He's going to limit turnovers. He can initiate offense and do so successfully. In his first college season in the SEC, he did so very successfully, averaged over 5 assists per game, less than 2 turnovers per game, had an over 3.5 to 1 assist to turnover rate. So for Boogie Flan, if you're looking for another guy who can dribble and create offense for your team a bit, that is what he's going to be capable of. Now, his big swing skill is going to be that pull-up shooting. If he develops and grows in that area, he could be an awesome steal pick in the second round for a team. Maybe even a late first-round pick, possibly. I'm not sure if he'll even be available for Detroit at their pick, but very intriguing option for them if he is, because of that developmental arc where if he does grow as a shooter and just become flat-out a better offensive player as a shooter, he becomes a really unique secondary creator for offense. Then Dink Pate, someone who's got really respectable positional size, likes to get to his dribble pull-up in the mid-range area. I think this is a draft and develop situation. I don't think Dink Pate, unlike a lot of these other options, could help them as much in year one of his career. I think Sears, Reid, Proctor, Brea all step in and are ready to contribute in the NBA immediately if they do ultimately keep their names in the draft. We'll see what happens with Proctor specifically, but I do think for Detroit, they have options here. There's some interesting players that could help them, and I wanted to lay them out here for you Pistons fans in this video. Then we move on to NBA free agency, and the Pistons do have a current maximum salary cap space of $27.616 million, which is pretty substantive, but probably not the likely outcome. In order to have that $27.6 million of cap space, they would have to renounce rights on all of Tim Hardaway Jr., Malik Beasley, and Dennis Schroeder. I just don't think that's probably the outcome, especially in a weaker free agency class this offseason, where, yes, there are some good names, like Reid, for example. I don't think Detroit's going to be really motivated to operate in that way with having to give up on some of their core pieces already. So I think the more likely outcome is they have about negative $6.4 million in cap space, and that would be a byproduct of renouncing rights on Tim Hardaway Jr., who has a $24.3 million cap hold. Now, they might not renounce rights. They might just come to an agreement on a very cheap deal, something like, 2 years, $15 million, 2 years, $12 million, somewhere in that range, where he's making roughly around the taxpayer mid-level exception, a much smaller salary figure than what he's been playing on. But the Pistons do have rookie contract extensions coming up here for Jalen, Duren, and Jaden Ivey. So they have to make some decisions. Jalen Duren's going to want to get paid. Jaden Ivey's kind of a tricky situation, one that the Pistons maybe let play out until restricted free agency because of that injury. But it also might be a good bargain time for them to try and extend him. Take a little bit of a bet that he'll get back well, rehab well from his injury. And you're looking at him maybe being a guy who, at $20 million a year, for example, would be an absolute steal of a contract with the cap continuing to grow and jump. So I think there's a lot of optionality here for Detroit in what they do. Now, the very important thing for me, Dennis Schroeder, almost a $17 million cap hold. I think his number when he signs, I think he'll re-sign in Detroit probably for about 3 years, maybe $39 million, somewhere in that range, where he's making a little bit less than this cap hold, $13 million annually roughly. I could see him maybe even accepting a little bit less than that, somewhere in that 3-year, $33 million contract realm, where he's making $11 million a year. I think for Schroeder and Beasley, they're looking for long-term staying power in one specific NBA city. Feels like Malik Beasley this year really found a home in Detroit. Feels like he wants to stay in Detroit. I could see him signing a 3 or 4 year deal to stay a Detroit Piston and taking somewhat of a team-friendly deal based on his production this past year to stay there and stay in the role that he was playing this year as an off-the-bench scoring option and floor spacer around Cade Cunningham and these young Pistons players that they've already got there. And then Schroeder, again, I think willing to stay in Detroit probably. He's not going to take a huge hometown discount for the Pistons to stay there, but one that I think will be a team-friendly deal still, given what his value was. Remember, Tobias Harris entering the final year of his contract. That's a very tradable contract now at this point. Again, I'm eating crow on that. What I said last year in the offseason, I was just frankly wrong. And then the 10 players already under contract there. A lot of them obviously on rookie deals yet. Cade Cunningham's extensions kicking in. So the Pistons, they have some difficulties here to try and navigate through and figure out financially. It's not just, oh, we have a whole bunch of cheap young players anymore. Some of these guys are starting to get paid. They're going to have to make some decisions about their roster because of that. Tim Hardaway Jr. might be one of those guys that goes as a result, but they can keep a majority of their core together at this point, which I do like for them going into next season. If they do act in free agency, which again, I don't think they really will, but if they do, there's a few different ways they could go. They'll have access to the non-tax mid-level exception that could be used on someone like Bruce Brown, for example, which I think a reunion back to Detroit would be quite valuable for the Pistons. I think he would fill a little niche that they could still use in terms of a small player who's good at setting screens and creating transition opportunities, getting on the glass a bit, just kind of fills a lot of those little gaps. So if you do lose Tim Hardaway Jr., I think Bruce Brown Jr. would be an upgrade there, despite being a worse shooter, a less respected three-point shooter than THJ. I think this is one of those areas where you upgrade enough in the other core areas of basketball that would be beneficial. I do like 2 Timberwolves for them, Reid and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Ultimately, I don't think Reid will be a Piston. Nickeil, I just don't see that really either, although he would be a great fit as a point of attack defender, corner shooter, one of the better catch and shoot corner shooters in the NBA, has been for quite a while. His ambidexterity as a passer as well is super valuable. So there are a couple Minnesota players that I do think make some sense, although the Pistons might be outpriced by another team like Brooklyn, for example, for either one of their services. And then Tre Jones out of Chicago. Another guy, he's not going to command too much. You can maybe even split up your mid-level exception, use it on a guy like Tre Jones to fill out your backcourt a little bit more. This will kind of hinge on what happens with Dennis Schroeder. If the Pistons feel like they can keep Schroeder and ultimately do, then Tre Jones is not essential for them. I think that's really where coming into your own negotiations, which will be at the forefront for Detroit this offseason, is more important than going out into free agency and trying to find external upgrades, because I just don't think there's a ton out there that make a lot of sense for Detroit this offseason anyway. So then when it comes to the big trade targets, Devin Booker, a notable Detroit fan, obviously born in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He is a Michigan homer big time, and we have seen him repping Detroit-based sports teams a ton. The Detroit Tigers, Detroit Red Wings, the Detroit Lions. Devin Booker is Detroit. And in the opportunity, if Devin Booker does become available, which very likely he does not, he does have an extension option basically this offseason with Phoenix, where they might offer him a 2-year, $150 million extension, which is huge money and might be hard for Devin Booker to pass up on. The reality, though, is if Phoenix does make Devin Booker available for trade, Detroit will call on him, and I think Devin Booker would be very, very open to a trade to Detroit. Obviously, pairing him with Cade Cunningham, think about his Detroit native desire to come back home. There's not a worry then of, oh, are we going to be able to retain him? Well, yes, Phoenix is a beautiful city. I do think Booker would like being back in Detroit if possible, but I don't think it's this is a done deal, this, that, or the other. I think Phoenix is going to want to keep him. So it's a difficult discussion. It's one that probably doesn't lead anywhere ultimately. And honestly, if you're Detroit too, you might want to take the cautious approach where you don't commit to making some kind of big trade right now, and you want to see how your team plays out for another season, get more information, and they do have control of their future draft picks, so they don't have to rush something right now to get a deal done for Devin Booker if it doesn't make sense for them long term. Lauri Markkanen kind of in that same boat. I do think he would be a tremendous front court addition for them off of Jalen Duren, next to Isaiah Stewart possibly. Although, again, the issue here is you have to match money, you have to trade out some pieces. What are you sending to Utah for Lauri? I just don't see a deal really materializing. A player that does make some sense here because of how readily affordable he would be to acquire would be Michael Porter Jr. Former lottery pick by the Denver Nuggets, obviously on a huge contract. Part of the reason why Denver might be looking to move him this offseason is to use that contract slot to try and upgrade and change their roster a little bit. MPJ, someone who hasn't had as big of a role this year for Denver as he has in years past. Head coach David Edelman has been a little bit more hesitant to play him at the end of games. And Detroit might look at that and say, hey, last year we went out and got Tim Hardaway Jr. and what was a salary dump from Dallas, and that worked out pretty well for us. This is a much bigger form of that in Michael Porter Jr., but maybe we can get involved here and bring in a player who his skill set does very clearly fit what we need. And maybe this is something centered around Tobias Harris's contract. And I know some Pistons fans are going to say, well, we don't really want to commit to Michael Porter Jr. long term. The idea would be, yes, you swallow a couple years of his bigger contract now while you're still young and improving. And he's a very natural fit next to Cade. And then going into his next contract, you're hoping you can sign him for significantly cheaper. And that might be worth giving up the final year of Tobias Harris's contract. And yet it presents some flexibility to Denver. You might be able to get MPJ without having to give up much more than just some matching contracts and maybe a small bit of draft capital. And that's where the value really lies here for Detroit, getting a younger player, someone who, yes, has had injury concerns in the past, but does fit skill set wise very, very well into this core. He rebounds very well for his size, obviously brings some good positional size as a small forward in the NBA. And I think for Detroit specifically, this does make some real inherent sense on their roster as well. So when it comes to next season, looking at their outlook, I do think this team will strongly consider their options, but will ultimately land on patience. I think that they will look at the market. I think they'll consider a Devin Booker deal. I think they'll consider MPJ. I think they'll consider a whole bunch of options. A lot of it will be wing play that they're going to be looking at. They're going to be looking at shooting. They're going to be looking at perimeter talent around Cade Cunningham. What they're going to ultimately decide on, though, is we have Jaden Ivey coming back from injury at some point. Our team was quite good this year. We won 44 games. We were much better than a year ago. Let's run it back. Let's try and keep everyone here, see what we can do, and we have control of our future draft picks. That's something they of course conveyed that pick this year to Minnesota at number 17. That's a home run outcome for Detroit because now going into next season, they have control of their draft capital. They can make whatever decisions they want to make down the road, and they still are going to be a pretty good team, we'd have to guess. Probably 45 plus wins next season. Now, I'm not projecting a huge improvement. I do think Cade will get a little bit better if Jaden Ivey comes back healthy and showcases that he can still be a great player. If Jalen Duren takes another slight step forward, Isaiah Stewart continues improving marginally, this team will just flat out be better. So 45-ish plus wins definitely I think is achievable for them. And again, the biggest thing, they're in control of their own future. They're ready to strike when they want to. It could be this offseason, although, again, I think they're going to be patient. I think they're going to think things through and be cautious in their approach. And I think that's good for the Detroit Pistons and their fans. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. It was a lot of fun talking about the Detroit Pistons in this one. And we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.